Hello friends, you might not know that every game in the Nancy Drew series takes inspiration from a Nancy Drew book, and the most recent game in the series, Mystery of the Seven Keys, is no different. Incidentally, if you're interested in comparisons between other Nancy Drew books and games, I have a whole series of book versus game videos just waiting for you to check them out. The book Mystery of the Seven Keys is based on is Diamond Deceit, which was first published in 1993 and is case number 83 of the Nancy Drew Files, a spin-off series which aimed to make Nancy Drew more mature and modern. She's flirting with other boys, she's using a pager, she's not your grandma's Nancy Drew, she's a cool girl now. If you have even a passing familiarity with Mystery of the Seven Keys, you'll probably know that it's about a jewel theft in Prague which involves skeleton knights, puppets, and computer hacking. Diamond Deceit is about a jewel theft in California which involves murder, messy relationships, and the movie biz. So yeah, this book is very different from Mystery of the Seven Keys. Searching for missing jewels, Nancy finds the perfect setting for murder. An urgent message from Bess draws Nancy to beautiful Carmel, California. Fading movie star Joanna Burton has accused jeweler Marcia Chung of replacing the diamonds in her necklace with fakes, but the case of the missing stones turns even more sinister when Ms. Burton ends up on the rocks at the bottom of a cliff. What led the actress to such a tragic final scene? Who pushed her over the edge? For Nancy, it's a murder mystery with more twists and turns than the Pacific Coast Highway, and she knows she's in a race against time. She must find the stolen diamonds before the killer strikes again, perhaps to put her on ice. So the only similarity seems to be the plotline about the stones in a diamond necklace being replaced with fakes, and maybe that's the only similarity, but part of the fun is reading through the whole book and learning what zany hijinks we missed out on. But let's talk about the scantily clad woman in the room. Not to sound too much like your prudish great aunt, but this is probably the raciest Nancy Drew cover I've ever seen. And boy, I've seen a lot of Nancy Drew covers. Just look at this absolute strumpet, with nothing but what looks to be a thin handkerchief between her and the eyes of the Lord. If I was buying a book for my beloved grandniece, I would not think this was a children's novel, I would think it was porn. But is this book a diamond in the rough? Or is it just rough? Let's find out. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoy this video, and proceed with caution if you haven't played Mystery of the Seven Keys or read the Diamond Deceit, because there will be spoilers for both. Also, if you're unaware, I have YouTube channel memberships, which are I think $2.99 Canadian a month, and you get an exclusive video every month. So if you'd like to support me in an additional form, that option is available.
The matter of my necklace that has now been replaced with fake gems is very confidential.
One thing that Diamond Deceit has that Mystery of the Seven Keys doesn't is Bess and George. Nancy's best girls are woefully absent from Key in any form, but they're an integral part of Diamond Deceit. The book's plot revolves around Nancy and George going to visit Bess in Carmel, California, where Bess has been staying with friends of her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Menendez. Feel free to forget about them, they have literally no relevance to the plot. But one thing you should know is that Bess is romantically involved with the Menendez's son, who runs the family restaurant, Café de Carmel. Upon their arrival in Carmel, Nancy and George head to the restaurant, walking past a few other shops along the way, including a jewelry store called Chung Original Designs. The girls were startled just then by the sound of angry voices from inside the shop. Peering through the glass door, Nancy saw a tall, blonde, stocky young man shaking his finger at a shorter, stocky, balding man. The door to the shop burst open. Nancy was caught in the path of the balding man, who shoved her back against a wall. The young man followed close behind, an angry expression marring his good looks. The balding man paused at the edge of the curb before turning around to face the younger man. Nancy detected a trace of challenge in his expression as he opened his mouth to speak. "Save it, Baxter," the blonde man snapped. "If one word of this gets out, you're as good as dead." You can tell Nancy's the protagonist because she arrives in a usually peaceful town and suddenly everything starts kicking off. You might think from this apparent foreshadowing that Cy Baxter / the Baldo is going to get murdered, but I can tell you now that that is not the case. This is what we in the business call a red herring. Then Bess arrives with a stocky young man in his 20s with straight dark hair. "Come over here." Bess took the young man by the arm and pulled him into their circle. "This is Ted," she told Nancy and George, grinning from ear to ear. Ted Tickerson. The group enter the Café de Carmel together. The lower half of each wall was covered in black and white tile. Neon-filled tubes shaped like musical instruments were placed on the upper wall space. Chrome-edged tables and red vinyl chairs filled the room. A jukebox stood against one wall. Slay, although it's giving more diner from Secrets Can Kill than Hunger Counselor Cafe. Just then the restaurant door opened and Ted entered, followed by the tall blonde guy from the jewelry shop. "This is Len Olson," Ted said. "He and his fiancée, Marcia Chung, rent the shop across the street. Len's a landscape architect, and Marcia is a jewelry designer. Len has a problem. His fiancée, Marcia, recently designed a new setting for some diamonds which belong to washed-up actress Joanna Burton. However, soon after Joanna received the new necklace, she filed a police report claiming that her diamonds had been replaced with fakes. She made this report at the behest of Cy Baxter, the Baldo Nancy saw coming out of Chung Original Designs, who is another local jewelry designer who Marcia used to work for. Joanna brought Cy the diamonds to appraise, and by diamonds I mean cubic zirconia, as that's what Cy discovered the stones actually were. Well, you know what they say. A cubic zirconia are a girl's best friend. So basically, Marcia is now up a certain creek without a paddle, and it isn't Icicle Creek. Len asks Nancy for help, so she decides to pay a visit to Cy Baxter. "How far is it to his store?" Nancy asked. "I'll go along and show you," Bess said. "Bess?" Ted looked at her critically. "You're leaving? Now?" Nancy didn't understand Ted's reaction. Bess had invited her and George to Carmel. Surely he knew that Bess would be spending time with them. Why was he being so possessive? Nancy, Bess, and George got up. "Bye, Ted. See you in a little while," George said. Ted folded his arms and stared at Nancy and George as they walked past him. Nancy shivered. The cold anger in Ted's dark eyes chilled her. Against all odds, Ted Tickerson somehow sucks even more than Ned Nickerson. At least Ned's biggest flaw is just being criminally boring, but Ted Tickerson is a certified suck-ass man. Although that is one good thing about Diamond Deceit compared to Mystery of the Seven Keys. Ned doesn't get more than a passing mention in the book, whereas in the game you're forced to talk to him like every half an hour. Nancy, Bess, and George head to Cy Baxter's store, which is called Baxter's Fine Jewelry. You know, it's fine. It's okay. Instead of a 2-scale model of the Prague astronomical clock, Cy has a display of cuckoo clocks in his shop. Nancy gets Cy talking, and he reveals that Joanna Burton was his customer in the past. "Miss Burton doesn't always pay her bills. She asked me to design a new setting for her necklace, but at the time she owed me for some work I'd done months earlier, so I refused." So clearly Joanna's new strategy to avoid paying her bills is to just accuse the person she owes money to of a crime. Well, you know what they say. Not paying your bills are a girl's best friend. Cy also reveals that it takes him 24 hours to appraise an item, meaning that Joanna's diamonds were with him overnight, giving him the opportunity to replace the diamonds himself. Nancy suggests, "Baxter didn't seem to be happy that Marcia left him to open her own jewelry store. Maybe he decided to steal the diamonds and ruin Marcia's reputation at the same time." After leaving Baxter's Fine Jewelry, Nancy, Bess, and George meet Ted Tickerson at the beach for a picnic. Ted Tickerson is sulking because the girls were a minute late arriving, and he refuses to talk to Nancy and George, even to say hello, because he has the mental maturity of a 3-year-old. Then Bess drops a bombshell. She's planning to move to Carmel to be with Ted Tickerson, but also because she's working as a pastry chef at the restaurant and is both really enjoying it and really good at it. This is an opportunity for me to do something on my own, she says, fairly. Bess and George in the books only really exist as an extension of Nancy, someone for her to bounce ideas off of. Bess's whole life must consist of getting dragged places to get involved with Nancy's problems. No wonder she's jumping at an opportunity to pursue her own passions away from Nancy. Nancy isn't happy though. Without Bess, that's one less person to Deus Ex Machina her out of any sticky situations she ends up in. Nancy felt a little jealous that Bess would choose Ted over her and George. She wanted to be happy for Bess, but instead she just felt a little hurt. How could Bess make a decision like this without even consulting her and George? Was it the job Bess found so exciting? Or the guy? Nancy didn't like the idea of her friend giving up everything she had in River Heights to spend time with a guy she had only known for a few weeks. Nancy makes some decent points, but this isn't a mutually exclusive decision. Is it so hard for her to believe that Bess is making this decision for herself, not based on Nancy and George versus Ted Tickerson? Moving to a different city doesn't mean she's somehow choosing Ted Tickerson over Nancy and George. It just means she's doing an essential part of growing up, trying new experiences. In making Bess's decision out to be so binary, Nancy is being just as possessive as Ted Tickerson. Maybe not quite as possessive as him, he's pretty possessive. I just don't think the ghostwriter is sending the best message by making Nancy be like, my best friends aren't allowed to move away from me or do anything for themselves or have any kind of life outside of being my best friends. The next day, Nancy pays a visit to Marcia Chung. Marcia tells Nancy she has a security system set up in her shop, monitored by a company called Seaside Security. Nancy steps out the back door to have a look around, but then Nancy gasped as a tall shape lunged out of the shadows at her. Before she could react, the figure had reached out and grabbed her. Nancy screamed as her arms were pulled behind her and held in a grip of iron. She struggled to free herself, but her attacker was too strong. Marcia comes running at Nancy's scream and she's like, it's fine, don't worry, I know this guy. When Nancy was free to turn around and confront her attacker, she found herself face to face with one of the handsomest men she'd ever seen. His eyes were a bright aqua blue, and his skin was perfectly tanned. His thick, wavy brown hair was streaked with sun-bleached highlights, as if he spent a lot of time at the beach. Nancy screaming in terror at one moment, being like, is my attacker a little, the next. This is Morgan Fowler, a guard for Seaside Security, who got a little overexcited about his job, bless him. Marcia introduces the two of them. Morgan's eyes widened as he took in Nancy. I don't think I've had the pleasure, he said, holding out his hand. When Nancy shook it, Morgan held on a little longer than he needed. A friend of yours, Marcia? He asked, never taking his eyes off Nancy. Nancy's helping Len and me find out what happened to Joanna Burton's necklace. She's a detective, Marcia explained. So you're a detective? Morgan asked. Perhaps you could use some help. Nancy wasn't sure if he was being condescending or if he was just flirting. Hey, little detective, why don't you investigate my No, I can't say it. No. Morgan is also an aspiring actor. Nancy wasn't surprised. It seemed to her that Morgan had been performing since they'd met. I can't believe there's not a single unthreatening hot man for Nancy to emotionally cheat on Ned with in this book. This is dire, people! How are the tweens supposed to live vicariously through Nancy and her friends if there are no unthreatening hot mans for them to flirt with? Back at the hotel, Nancy receives a mysterious package. Nancy's stomach churned as she gazed down at the smashed cuckoo clock that lay in the box. The cuckoo lay crushed outside the clock's little door. A sheet of paper was affixed to its pointy beak. Written on the paper in block letters were the words, "Time to mind your own business." Deeply obsessed with anonymous threat makers who make cute puns in their anonymous threats. It really decreases their credibility. Like, imagine them sitting alone in their room, googling mean clock puns. Or like, "Time to get a life. Get destroyed, loser." Also, this is so stay tuned for danger coded. This person isn't even original. "I can't believe someone is threatening you," George said. "Really? 'Cause I can." It happens at least once a week for Nancy. This is one of the few things that Diamond Deceit actually has in common with Mystery of the Seven Keys. Someone threatening Nancy's life. The next morning, Nancy and George drive up to Joanna Burton's mansion. Nancy was just easing into the turn when a white pickup truck came roaring around the curve from the opposite direction. It was halfway in Nancy's lane, heading straight at the girl's car. "Nancy, look out!" George cried. Her face was white as she grabbed the dashboard. Nancy instinctively jerked the car to the right to avoid a collision. In that instant, she got a dizzying glimpse of the rocky beach and water far below. She heard George gasp as she slammed on the brakes and spun the wheel to the left and away from the cliff's edge. The wheels screeched as the car skidded out of control. Nancy felt the bump as the car jumped onto the narrow shoulder. They were headed toward the edge of the drop-off. And that's the end of the chapter. Bit on the nose for Ms. Carolyn Keene to end it on a literal cliffhanger, but these books aren't exactly subtle. Like 2 pages ago when the culprit sent Nancy a clock to reiterate that it's time to mind her own business, just in case she's illiterate, I guess. Anyway, Nancy and George don't fly over the edge to meet their deaths in a catastrophic explosion, but continue on their way to Joanna Burton's place. Once there, they're met with a set of closed gates blocking the drive. Nancy tries the intercom, but there's no response. The piercing sound of an approaching siren interrupted Nancy's thoughts, and in the next minute, a small white car with flashing lights pulled up behind their car. It's Morgan, the hot security guy, doing the second best thing to running up waving a giant red flag. Because apparently the characters in this book are so dense that they need a literal symbol that produces noise and flashing lights to let them know that someone who is clearly a certified suck-ass man is a certified suck-ass man. And by characters, I mean Bess. Really wish Ted Dickerson had come with a siren. Then someone else pulls up in a sleek silver sports car. A tall woman with red hair done up in a smart French twist stepped out of the car. She was dressed in a navy suit and a red silk blouse. This is Stephanie Cook, Joanna's agent. Wow, a red silk blouse. Kind of reminds me of what I was saying a moment ago about red flags. Write a little guess down now as to who you think the culprit or culprits are, and we'll see if you're right at the end. The 4 of them walk up to the house, and Nancy notices 2 coffee cups set out on a table, as though Joanna had company. The house was Spanish style, with a red tile roof and dark red trim, Nancy saw when she joined George at the front door. She was surprised to note that the paint on the trim was peeling. "Check out this view," George exclaimed. Nancy had to agree that it was spectacular. A set of steps was cut into the hillside leading down to a small crescent of beach. Beyond, the ocean stretched as far as the eye could see, sparkling in the bright sunlight. Then Nancy notices something. The first thing Nancy saw was a swirl of hot pink fabric. Then she caught sight of the dark hair and the outstretched, immobile hand. The realization hit her in a sickening flash. A woman's body lay crumpled at the bottom of the steps. Nancy hurried down to the beach. When she reached the sand, she definitely recognized Joanna Burton's lovely features. There was no blood on her, but the woman's neck was bent at an odd angle. Nancy felt for a pulse. There was none. I pull a previously hidden lever and 10,000 balloons fall from the ceiling. Written on every single balloon are the words, "It's a murder!" If only I had the budget for that. I think this is one thing that Mystery of the Seven Keys should definitely have taken from this book. Murder. How cool would it have been if, when solving the riddles to find all the key pages, Nancy found Oscar's lifeless body stuffed into the suit of armor in the museum? Really cool, I think. Morgan calls for the police and an ambulance, and soon a detective shows up. At least the police are a little more responsive in this book than in Mystery of the Seven Keys. The detective finds a gold sea otter charm clutched in Joanna's hand, and Nancy remembers that Marcia was wearing a charm bracelet, and also that Cy Baxter specializes in designing charms. But when Nancy goes to talk to Marcia, she's no longer wearing her bracelet, and she refuses to say where she was that morning. Nancy and George head back to Café de Carmel to tell Bess about their eventful morning, but encounter Ted Tickerson instead. "Bess is busy," he said curtly. "Come on, you're the boss. Tell her she can take a break," George teased. Ted just glowered at George. "She's not here right now," he told her. What was with this guy, Nancy wondered. He was acting as if it were a crime even to ask about Bess. "Bess and I have a business to run," Ted said. "She said to tell you that she'll catch up with you when she has time." With that, he disappeared back into the kitchen. George turned to Nancy, angry red spots coloring her cheeks. "She'll catch up with us when she has time?" George said, keeping her voice low. "Bess asked us to come here. She's hardly had time to say hi since we arrived." Ted Tickerson, more like Ted Dick. That really doesn't work because his name isn't Tickerson or even Nickerson, but you know. I never let the truth get in the way of a good story. 'Cause Ted Tickerson is being such a Ted Dickerson, Nancy and George leave and head over to Baxter's Fine Jewelry. The girls talk to Cy Baxter, who claims that his car broke down that morning, so he couldn't possibly have had time to murder Joanna Burton. They notice his assistant, Rachel, working on a charm bracelet, which Nancy speculates might be Marcia's. She also remembers seeing Len, Marcia's fiancé, talking to Rachel. Rachel claims that Len was giving her Marcia's charm bracelet because he wanted to surprise Marcia with a new charm of the logo of his landscaping business. Free advertising for your business. Very romantic. But Nancy recognizes the logo. It was on the side of the truck which nearly ran her and George off the cliff. Nancy could hardly believe her eyes. There was a very good chance that she and George had seen Len speeding away from the murder scene. At the very least, they saw him commit a hit and run, which is also a crime. Nancy and George head back to the restaurant and fill Bess in on everything that's happened. Bess suggests the three of them drive up to the car dealership to check on Cy Baxter's alibi. George shot a look at the kitchen. "Do you think Ted will let you come with us?" she asked sarcastically. "What do you mean, let me come with you? I'm all finished for the day. Why would he care?" Bess asked. George fixed her cousin with a sober gaze. "Bess, did you notice that Ted isn't very excited about us being here? He doesn't seem to like it when you go anyplace with us," she said. "That's crazy," Bess said defensively. "He couldn't wait to meet you two. Then why does he think of something else for you to do every time we plan to do something together?" George asked. "I have a job now, and that job has certain responsibilities. Ted is my boss, George," Bess said. "Can't believe Bess is this whipped for the world's most average man. Go walk into an Old Navy on a Sunday afternoon, and you'll find hundreds of stocky young men with straight dark hair. I'm sure at least one of them won't be a certified suck-ass man." Before the tension can be resolved, Stephanie Cook shows up, dressed in her best morning attire. Stephanie was dressed in a white leather jumpsuit studded with sequins. Her red hair was hanging loose down her back in long waves. She walks into this family restaurant at 3:30 in the afternoon looking like a yassified Elvis, like, "I'm gonna stunt on all these beasties traumatized by Joanna's death." Joanna's only been dead for 2 hours. Show some f***ing respect. Stephanie then offers Nancy a movie deal, and Nancy's like, no? Stephanie, you might not know this, but our girl Nancy does not photograph well. Then Nancy gets an anonymous phone call from someone asking her to meet them at the beach at sunset, alone. Is this a date? What are we, anonymous caller? Anyway, it's probably a good idea to go to the meetup, despite Bess and George's objections and the cold hard fact that someone was murdered at the beach like an hour ago. So Nancy heads to the beach thinking how romantic the sunset is. And she gets a big rock thrown at her head. Well, you know what they say. Big Rock, our girl's best friend. Nancy manages to jump out of the way of the big rock, but she sprains her ankle in the process. So just visualize her with a slight limp for the rest of the book. The next morning, the girls head to Cafe de Carmel. Bess struggles to find a parking spot, so Nancy and George hop out and go on ahead. Remember that. At the restaurant, Ted Dickerson has some shocking news. The police have taken Marcia Chung in for questioning. Just then, Len rushes in, wanting to know where Marcia is. Kinda weird that Ted Dickerson knows that Marcia was taken in by the police, but not her fiancé. Nancy accuses Len of fleeing the scene of Joanna's murder and almost manslaughtering her and George. "Stop bothering Len," a woman's voice spoke up from the doorway of the restaurant. Marcia Chung was standing just inside the door, a dark, unreadable expression on her face. Len hurried to Marcia's side, drawing her close. "Are you all right? What happened?" Without answering his questions, Marcia turned to face the others. "Len wasn't at Joanna Burton's this morning," she said firmly. "But how can you be sure?" Bess asked hesitantly. Marcia locked eyes with her fiancé, then replied, "I know because I was there." Notice anything in that last passage? At one point, Bess asks Marcia a question, but Bess isn't there. At this point, she's still parking the car. In fact, she enters the restaurant 3 pages later. Listen, this book is so boring that I'm literally having to point out textual errors for fun. That's how low I've had to stoop. Marcia explains that she wasn't actually in the neighborhood to kill Joanna Burton, but to spy on her fiancé because she was worried about what he might do. In other words, she wasn't there to kill Joanna Burton, but because she was worried Len might kill Joanna Burton. Yeah, that's so much better. Len says he was just doing some yard work for a client who coincidentally lives right next door to Joanna Burton, and then had to rush off to his next appointment, which is when he nearly forced Nancy and George off the road to their early deaths. Okay, so Len, what you're saying is you didn't stop to make sure the people you almost drove off a cliff were okay after almost driving them off a cliff? You may be clearing yourself of murder, but you're not making yourself look like a great person. Marcia, are you sure you want to marry this guy? Marcia says when she heard about Joanna's murder, she initially assumed that Len had killed Joanna. Len's like, "Oh, I would never kill someone. I always rant and rave when I'm upset. It's just the way I let off steam." Marcia, girl, there's still time to back out of this marriage. Just saying. It's funny to me how this book frames Ted Dickerson as a bad, nasty man, but Len as a nice guy with just a little whittle temper issue. Like, his fiancé literally thinks he's capable of murder. That was her first thought after hearing that an acquaintance of his had been killed. She's taking time off work to follow him around because she's worried he might kill someone. And you're telling me I'm supposed to think he's a good guy? Len and Marcia leave, and Ted Dickerson turns to Bess. Ted fixed her with stony dark eyes. "Are you going to be gone all day tomorrow?" he asked her. The annoyance in his voice was clear. "Ted, you'll do just fine," Bess said simply. This was the Bess Nancy knew, the one who wouldn't let Ted or any other guy push her around. Turning back to Nancy, Bess said, "I'll go get the car. I have to go right by a video store on the way, so I think I'll rent a movie too. We can borrow your VCR, can't we, Ted?" Bess asked. Sure," Ted said, but his expression told Nancy he wasn't happy about anything. At the video store, George held up a video cassette. On the cover was a young woman peering through a magnifying glass. The title of the movie was Diamond Deceit, and the woman on the cover, Joanna Burton. She was playing Trish Tottenham, a detective. Diamond Deceit, huh? Okay, Ms. Keene, that's pretty meta. The girls bump into Morgan Fowler, who tells them Stephanie Cook got him a role in a movie. On the way back to the motel, Nancy picks up a newspaper which has an article about Joanna's death. It said she was going to do another Trish Tottenham movie, a mature Trish. Everything's getting a remake these days. It says that the future of the picture is in doubt because Joanna was providing a portion of the financing. Nancy sat up straight. That didn't make sense. She didn't have any money of her own. Cy Baxter said she didn't pay her bills, and we saw how worn her house was. Where would she get the money to invest in a movie? The paint was slightly peeling and that's considered worn? Okay. In a flash, the solution suddenly became clear to Nancy. Unless she planned on coming into some big money soon. Money from the sale of some diamonds. I have a feeling that the person who stole Joanna Burton's diamonds was Joanna herself. Then she'd have the insurance money and the diamonds, in case she needed to sell them to raise more money. Nancy frowned as another thought occurred to her. Wait a minute, if Joanna did steal her own diamonds, then who killed her? And why? Maybe she caught someone trying to take the diamonds from her, and that person got scared and killed her, George suggested. That makes sense, Nancy agreed. Or maybe the guilty person is someone who might profit from her death. Nancy paused, snapping her fingers. The only person who's come out ahead in this scheme is Morgan Fowler. He has a role in the movie and a new agent. I was really excited to learn more about the plot of Diamond Deceit, but unfortunately Nancy only sees a small part of it before falling asleep, enough to know that someone's diamond ring gets stolen at a dinner party. The next day, George goes off to play some kind of sports ball, and Nancy and Bess settle in for a girls' day together. However, this is interrupted by a phone call from Ted Tickerson. Bess slammed the receiver down. I can't believe it, she told Nancy. I asked Ted to do one simple thing. Put the pastries in the refrigerator when he closed up last night. Well, he forgot, and they spoiled, so I have to go make something to serve today. Did he say why he couldn't get desserts from someplace else? Nancy asked. He said some people are coming just to try my desserts, Bess said. Nancy frowned. She wouldn't be surprised if Ted had lied. I think Ted Tickerson is lying too. It's clearly another manipulative strategy to wrench Bess away from her friends. After Bess leaves, Nancy decides to watch a bit more of the Diamond Deceit movie, so rejoice! We get more information about this fascinating fictional movie. In the movie, Joanna Burton in her Trish Tottenham role was searching for a stolen diamond. Trish carefully searched the house as music played to a crescendo in the background. When she found the diamond, Nancy was struck by the simplicity of the hiding place. I know where Joanna Burton hid her diamonds! Armed with the confidence that Joanna would have hidden her diamonds based on a movie Easter egg, Nancy decides to drive over to her house. Nancy scribbled a quick note to Bess and George telling them where she was going. Then she grabbed her purse and limped out to the car. As she unlocked the door, Nancy heard furtive footsteps approaching her from behind. Nancy whirled around and found herself face to face with Cy Baxter's assistant. Rachel, Nancy exclaimed. What are you doing here? Nancy saw that Rachel was still wearing the navy dress she'd had on the day before. Her dark hair was a mess, and she wore no makeup. No makeup. Surely the most foreboding sign of all. You've got to help me, Rachel pleaded, grabbing Nancy's arm. My life is in grave danger. Rachel took a deep breath before beginning. I'm the one who replaced the diamonds in Joanna Burton's necklace with cubic zirconia, she confessed. Rachel tells Nancy she used to work in Hollywood, and one day Stephanie Cook caught her accidentally stealing an actor's sapphire ring. Well, you know what they say. Sapphires are a girl's best friend. Fast forward to the present when Stephanie arrived in Carmel and recognized Rachel. She began to blackmail Rachel and forced her to switch the diamonds with fakes. Stephanie told me that you were investigating the gem switch. She said that if I told anyone about my part in it, she'd make it look as if I was behind the whole scam. Suddenly another piece of the puzzle fell into place for Nancy. So that's when you sent me that smashed cuckoo clock, to try to scare me off the case. A blush came to Rachel's cheeks as she nodded. That clock had just come in for a customer, but I sent it to you instead. Cy will kill me when he finds out. Rachel, I really don't think now is the time to throw around the phrase, he'll kill me, lightly. You know, considering Joanna was killed, yesterday. Nancy leaves Rachel and heads to Joanna's house to look for the diamonds. When she arrives, the garage is open and Stephanie's car is there. Nancy darted forward and pressed her face against the car window. Immediately, she spied a gold charm bracelet lying in the change bin between the two front seats. The bracelet was spread out, and it was easy to see there was a gap between two charms. Nancy let out a low whistle. So Stephanie had pushed Joanna Burton down the balcony stairs. Chances were that Stephanie was the person who'd been drinking coffee with Joanna Burton. Still, Nancy couldn't understand why Stephanie would kill Joanna when they were on the brink of closing a big deal. If you wrote down Stephanie as your little guess as to who the culprit is, congratulations! Good work using your masterful skills of literary interpretation to determine the killer. I can't leave without testing my theory about where the diamonds are, Nancy whispered out loud. Nancy, please, there's literally a murderer in the house. Are you funding stupid? And yes, she probably is, because she sneaks inside and heads to the kitchen. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing Trish Tottenham's search for the diamond in Diamond Deceit. Nancy opened the freezer door and took out the single tray of ice, just as she'd watched Trish Tottenham do. Carrying the tray to the sink, she turned on a thin stream of hot water and held the tray beneath it. She watched as the cubes slowly melted. "Wow," Nancy exclaimed softly. Her eyes opened wide as she stared down at a tray studded with 12 sparkling diamonds. Ooh, Carolyn Keene, you tickle me. This is humorous because ice can be used as a slang term to mean diamonds. Well, you know what they say. Ice are a girl's best friend. But I genuinely think this is really fun, both Nancy figuring out where the diamonds are based on a movie and the stones being hidden in the ice cube tray. It's so funny to me as well how strongly the conclusion of this book hinges on George deciding to rent Diamond Deceit from the video store. Like if she decided to rent Free Willy or Jason Goes to Hell or Coneheads or one of the other hit movies from 1993 instead, Nancy would probably have never found the diamonds. Unfortunately though, before Nancy can escape with the gems, Stephanie catches her. Nancy tries to distract Stephanie with the classic ploy of describing the culprit's plan to them. The reason the diamonds were replaced with fakes was to get insurance money to finance the movie that would give Joanna Burton her big comeback break, Nancy began. Very good, Stephanie said, impressed. The only way Joanna could get a part was to buy her way in. Since she didn't have any money, I convinced her that she could sell her jewelry. The sentimental old fool didn't want to get rid of the diamonds her dear departed husband had given her. I had to figure out a way we could get the money and still keep the diamonds. Not a bad plan, eh? Stephanie said proudly. What I can't understand is why you murdered her, Nancy said. For a brief moment, Stephanie's eyes showed a flicker of sadness. That wasn't part of the plan, she said quickly. Joanna was going to back out of the scam when she heard that Marcia might be arrested for theft. She said she didn't realize that someone else might be hurt. Even though it was the middle of the night, I got in my car and drove up from LA. I didn't get here until after 2 a.m. I tried all night to talk some sense into her. I told her I'd take care of it, but she fired me. So you pushed her, Nancy guessed, keeping her voice calm. I didn't mean to, Stephanie said, but I was tired and angry. As Joanna was walking away from me, I took her by the shoulders and tried to shake some sense into her. Stephanie pointed out the French doors. She was standing there, at the top of the steps. The agent's voice took on a faraway tone. Nancy could tell that she was reliving the awful moment. When I let go, Joanna swayed for a moment. I reached out to try to catch her, Stephanie went on, voice rising. I caught hold of her beach wrap, but the seam tore. She grabbed at my arm but missed and tumbled down the steps. Stephanie also reveals that Morgan Fowler is her accomplice, and he's willing to do anything to make it big in Hollywood, including throwing big rocks at Nancy. Congrats to those who guessed Morgan as the culprit as well. That siren was subtle stuff. When Nancy gets an opportunity, she runs out of the house. The stairs leading to the beach were right in front of her, and Nancy started down them. She gasped when she felt hands shove against her back. She swayed slightly, then plunged forward. No! Nancy screamed. The last thing she felt was a blinding pain as her head struck the stairs. Then everything went black. "Nancy, why are you running towards the spot where a woman was just murdered?" Nancy couldn't figure out why she had her clothes on in the bathtub, or why she'd let the water get so cold. She didn't want to open her eyes to find out, because her head was throbbing. At last, she managed to open one eye, but all she saw was swirling gray. Perhaps her dream wasn't over yet. Nancy opened both eyes, then slowly sat up. If she was dreaming, her head and ankle wouldn't hurt so much. Beneath her, Nancy felt the rough surface of a large rock. Water lapped gently against her body, and fog wrapped her in a gray blanket. She couldn't see more than 2 feet in front of her. Nancy tried to think where she was. How had she ended up here? Then it all came back to her. The scene with Stephanie and getting pushed down the steps. Nancy realizes that Stephanie's left her there to drown. She somehow manages to swim to the beach, and just at that moment, Bess and George run up. How did they find Nancy? I guess that's the power of friendship. And also Deus Ex Machinas, which is why Bess simply can't move away from River Heights, and why she needs to drop everything whenever Nancy requires her to come along on another mystery-solving trip. They get back to Joanna's house just in time to prevent Stephanie from getting away with the diamonds. In the game, the culprit is also a blunt woman who doesn't hide her truth in the form of Ladina's laddie, the gemologist, who is also assisted by an accomplice. Although in the book, Joanna is restrained by an arm lock from George, and in Mystery of the Seven Keys, Vladina gets a taser lobotomy from the Prague Royal Crown. Then there's a time jump to the next day. Nancy's recovering from her injuries. Rachel has sent charm bracelets to Nancy, Bess, and George as thanks for clearing her name. We're supposed to be happy that Len and Marcia are getting married, and Bess announces that she's decided not to stay in Carmel. "Ted hadn't wanted me to go look for you yesterday," Bess said. "What if we hadn't? What would have happened to you?" Anyway, that got me thinking about some of the things you guys have said. I realized that every time we wanted to do something, Ted tried to stop me. George said, "I'm sure Ted has his good side, but you have to admit that he hasn't shown it much since you and Nancy got here," Bess said, frowning. "I've been thinking about it a lot. There's no way I can give up all I have in River Heights for someone who's so jealous and possessive. What kind of life would that be?" "We're sorry things didn't work out for you here," Nancy said. "Shut up! No, you're not!" Bess leaned back in her chair with a sigh. "I think I got carried away by all the compliments on my desserts," Bess admitted. "I can still bake in River Heights, and maybe I'll even get 1 or 2 good words on my desserts there." Nancy couldn't help grinning. "Bess, you never have to ask for compliments. You are the greatest," she said. She and George swooped down on Bess to wrap her in a giant hug. Well, you know what they say. A girl's best friends are a girl's best friend.
I recovered Adela's jewels. Vladina needed the necklace for its pearls, since they can't be reproduced with alchemy.
Much like Cy Baxter's jewelry, this book is fine. It's only really notable for being the basis of Mystery of the Seven Keys, and for Bess having more agency and personal interest than wanting to lose 5 pounds, which is the usual for most Nancy Drew books. It's honestly impressive how Ms. Carolyn Keene made a book about murder so dull. I know not everyone loved Mystery of the Seven Keys, but at least it had more action than Diamond Deceit, in which Nancy spends most of the book driving around, listening to uninteresting conversations and witnessing other people's interpersonal drama. And as we've discovered over the course of this book, it really doesn't have much in common with Mystery of the Seven Keys. The synopsis told us all we need to know, that the only element Her Interactive borrowed from Diamond Deceit was the forged stones in the necklace. However, there are a few cute Easter eggs which reference Diamond Deceit in the game. First, in the mystery section of the bookshelves in the Hunger Kunstler Cafe, you can see a copy of a book called Diamond Deceit by the author Trish Tottenham, which, of course, is the role Joanna Burton plays in the movie Diamond Deceit. Christopher Nolan's brain is twisted into knots over how meta this is right now. Additionally, in Merrick's balance ledger in Apparat, you can see he sold a gold sea otter charm to Chung Original designs, and a Swiss clock to Cy Baxter. Super subtle references that will pass you by if you aren't me or one of the other 161 intellectuals who have read this book, to judge from the amount of Goodreads ratings. And if you're like, intellectuals, be serious, this is a corporate commissioned children's book series. Just take a look at what readers of Nancy Drew Files number 83, Diamond Deceit, also enjoyed. That's right. William motherfucking Shakespeare's Hamlet. Bet you feel really silly now. Me putting down Nancy Drew Files number 83 Diamond Deceit to read Hamlet. And that's girl culture. Anyway, this book isn't very interesting and doesn't have much in common with Mystery of the Seven Keys. Like, comment, subscribe, and watch my other book versus game videos. Goodbye. It's night.